So thank you for coming and joining us for this talk. It's just going on with the flow, which is about, as I'm sure you're aware, we're thinking about the ideas of co-creativity and agency and well-being in relation to working with the arts, with people living with dementia. It's great to have so many of you here, much appreciated. All of the work that we're talking about obviously happened pre-pandemic and pre-lockdown and pre-COVID. But I think if there's anything that this time has shown us, it is in fact the importance that there still is of thinking about the issues that we're going to be talking about, I think, in this presentation. But it's important that we don't lose sight of these ideas about agency and about well-being, and it isn't all completely just subsumed with coping with COVID. It's important that we keep these ideas going and that we continue to think about them and we continue to highlight them. And we will talk about that a little bit as part of the presentation as well. I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Hannah Zeilig, who was like a co-researcher in this project. Hannah is Senior Research Fellow at the University of the Arts in London. Will be co-presenting with me alongside Millie Williams, who is a PhD student also based at the University of the Arts and at UCL. So you'll be hearing from both of them later as well. So yeah, as I said, Millie, Hannah and myself are going to say something now about working with the arts co-creatively alongside people who are living with dementia. We're going to focus on a project called With All, which was a co-creative arts project involving ourselves, people with dementia, and a group of professional artists. Both Hannah and I have worked with people living with dementia for over 20 years, working creatively with staff and residents of care homes. And when we met something like 7 years ago, we discovered a shared interest in the role of the arts for those living with dementia, and also the possibilities that might exist for artists in working in this area. We were able to collaborate through a project called Created Out of Mind. This was a research project that was funded by Wellcome that we were part of from October 2016 to July 2018, which included a residency in the Hub space, which is on the top floor of the Wellcome collection in London. The aim of Created Out of Mind was to challenge and shape perceptions of dementia. It enabled us to bring our varied but complementary experiences, interests and skills together to further explore this area. And we also had the extreme good fortune to meet Millie. So Millie has been working with people with dementia for the past decade or so, and as I've said, is currently doing a PhD about agency and dementia. Hannah, Millie and I wanted to explore the relatively uncharted territory of co-creativity with people with dementia. The purpose of the majority of participatory arts projects is predominantly about promoting health, cognitive function, communication and well-being. And there tends to be an emphasis on the instrumental benefits for people living with dementia. We wanted to attempt to explore creative activity for its own sake, as something collective rather than individual, and as something conditioned by a person's relationships and wider context, rather than as something that happens solely in our brains.
Thank you, Julian. So this approach is linked to our interest in how creativity might connect with agency for people living with dementia. So the term agency can refer to quite distinctly different things depending on who you're talking to. So most people will have encountered agency as referring to a business that represents one group of people. So for example, within a care setting, the term agency staff will be well known. But the definition of agency that's pertinent here refers in some way to our ability to act, to affect changes in the world around us, and to be held responsible for our actions. For those living with dementia, there is assumed to be a straightforward loss of agency, and this is due to understandings of agency that are closely tied to rationality and reaching a threshold of some kind of cognitive ability. However, in our work, we've begun to consider agency as something that's also embodied, emotional, creative, and embedded in a social context. We've also begun to look at neurodiverse approaches to agency that view agency as something that can be on a spectrum and that can fluctuate. But centrally, agency is a way of expressing yourself through your actions, which is actually a definition offered to us by someone living with dementia. We wanted to explore whether by working co-creatively, we could challenge people's perception of a loss of agency in dementia by showing that people living with dementia are still able to exercise their agency through creativity. And right now, when the COVID-19 crisis has caused irreparable damage to those living with and alongside dementia, arguably causing people to sacrifice some of their human rights in order to stay safe during this pandemic, it's even more important that we acknowledge and support the agency of people with dementia. So the term co-creativity is still fairly new. It's not defined in the Oxford English Dictionary, and its borders and its features remain somewhat indistinct. Therefore, there's currently no unified agreement concerning what this term refers to or how it differs from collaboration and participation or co-design, for instance. Nonetheless, it's steadily gaining in popularity, and I'm sure that it isn't a new word to most of the people here, and neither are some of these related co-words that we've listed. And please, if you think there's any that we've missed, please pop them in the chat box and we'll try and collect as many as we can. So one example of the popularity of this term is its adoption by businesses and organisations. So here we have examples from the clothing brand Monkey, IKEA and BMW. So there is a growing awareness of the benefits of co-creation, co-design and co-creativity more widely and within dementia care. However, there is still relatively little discussion of the possibility that the arts can be practiced co-creatively or the role of the arts as generating co-creativity amongst people with a dementia.
So thank you, Millie. Centrally, what we wanted to do was to investigate how co-creativity might affect well-being from the perspectives of people with dementia and their carers. And so we conceived a project to explore all of these ideas in practice. We called it Withal, and it was a 10-week co-creative arts project that took place every Wednesday at the Hub at the Wellcome Collection from January to March 2018. The project was experimental, a way of testing the mechanisms of co-creativity that Julian and I had identified in previous work. So these mechanisms and principles included improvisation, having a flexible structure, shared leadership, and an utter lack of emphasis on any particular output. Above all, the Withal project was based on notions of equality and an understanding that creativity could be something that exists within and is shared interdependently by a group, rather than being restricted to certain talented individuals. So improvisation then. It'd be interesting to know how you all think about improvisation, what you think it enables and what you think the challenges are. And this is something that maybe we can discuss at the end of this presentation. However, in his book, Free Play, that was written in 1990, the writer and musician Stephen Nachmanovich, writes, "The heart of improvisation is the free play of consciousness, as it draws, writes, paints, and plays the raw material emerging from the unconscious. Improvisation and the absence of a predetermined plan is also associated with a shared uncertainty. This can facilitate the shedding of habitual defenses and roles, and so the ability to connect spontaneously and in new ways with others. However, improvisation by its very nature also involves that everyone takes risks, potentially feeling that they are making mistakes. And of course, this in itself can help to generate a sense of equality. Musicians have no written music to rely on. Dancers have no choreography. There are no lines or lyrics to remember, and each expression of the free play of consciousness exists in the moment and in relationship with what came before and with what follows. We thought that a loose and flexible structure would be very important for the With All project. And we found it helpful to think of this structure as like an exoskeleton, something that could be quickly shed and reconfigured, that remained flexible and responsive, but also provided enough safety.
So thinking about leadership, we were inspired by the image of a group of starlings or a murmuration of starlings. It's clear, like when we watch this happening, that there is no one bird that is in charge, but that the leadership changes from moment to moment. This has of course been studied, and it's something that's known as scale-free correlation, or as the author of a paper on the subject describes it, the change in the behavioural state of one animal affects and is affected by that of all other animals in the group, no matter how large the group is. And the author of that paper is Andrea Cavagna. It's from a paper in 2014, and I'll share the link for that paper in the chat with you later. For our project, we wanted above all for the principle of equality to be fundamental, with an attempt to minimise the distinctions between artists, people living with dementia, and their partners and friends. Everyone would be a participant. We would also have no predetermined intention of working towards any particular artistic output, unless that emerged collectively from the group. Our group comprised 3 musicians, 2 dancers, 2 researchers, and of course centrally a group of people living with dementia and their partners. And so our project flowed from one week to the next, working entirely through improvisation using music and dance, with each person contributing as they wished. The sessions took the form of a series of improvised pieces, sometimes instigated by one of the professional artists, and sometimes by the people living with dementia and their partners. There was an absorption in the moment-to-moment creativity of the group, with leadership frequently flowing from one person to another as the moods took them. We didn't make anything that could really be called an output. Each piece existed only in the moment in which it was being made and was only for the people who were making it.
Thank you, Julian. So we used multiple methods to capture what happened within these sessions. So we used video. We filmed the sessions using 2 video cameras that were positioned at different places in the room and at different angles. And later we watched these videos back and made notes. Hannah and I also sat in the group and made field notes throughout the session as participant observers. And this was really important so we could get a real sense of the group. We interviewed the participants with dementia and their carers around the end of the set of sessions, and these interviews were a conversation and unstructured. We also asked participants to fill in questionnaires, and the artists wrote reflections after each session, and these took many different forms, for example, short prose pieces and poetry. We then coded the interview data and the video data. So this meant that all the researchers went through this data and highlighted and assigned codes to significant sections. So for example, this quote from one of the interviews could be coded as such. So you can see that we've highlighted one sentence about leadership, another sentence about the specific experience of living with a dementia, and then we've coded a few phrases about space. So we then all met up, and through discussion, the codes were collapsed into groups from which 3 main themes emerged. Here are the codes that emerged from the interviews put alongside the codes that emerged from the video data. So for example, journey with no map came from the interviews and autonomy came from the videos. And we've listed a few of the key subgroups here as well.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about this theme, journey with no map and autonomy. This captured for us the idea of a lack of predetermined direction. So if you embark on a journey without a map, there's also a sense of self-sufficiency and freedom that are features of autonomy. And so here are some of the things that people who took part in the project said that led us to think about this theme. There was always this part where we just didn't quite know, which made us a bit uncomfortable. At the same time, Daniel said after the last time especially, I like going because when I'm there, my head doesn't hurt. And also, I think that's the creative aspect of the whole thing. It's led by the people who you're trying to help. And if they are just sitting there being rather resistant to it all, that would show. But it's the opposite. And everyone seems to benefit greatly. It's also really important to acknowledge that there were times of uncertainty and anxiety during the sessions. After all, if there are few boundaries and individuals are invited to be creative agents, this can also cause discomfort. So the inherent risk involved in taking in improvisation has already been spoken about a little bit. And the comment from one of these participants reflects this. I think there's a kind of awkwardness too in a situation like this. This feeling of awkwardness is often an important part of the creative process as people find their way towards clarity and originality. And you can often only get there by finding your own way and not following anyone else's directions. So another important theme was people together and connections. And this is about really the central role of the group as part of the co-creative process. This theme describes the sense of community that the co-creative sessions facilitated. The video and interview data revealed the group nurturing, caring for and attending to one another. For instance, through gestures, echoing one another's movements, or stroking each other's backs by inviting each other to join a dance or offering encouragement when others are improvising group songs and joining in. So again, examples of some of the quotes that led us to this theme are, well, yes, because it's the whole group that makes a whole thing. And yes, I felt very good. I felt very, what's the word with it? With you and with everybody. I felt at ease. I felt happy. And when describing the group, someone said memorably that it was as if you know them next door of your house. So the other major theme was around engagement with the art form and art as an enabler. So engagement with art forms, in this case, music and dance, was central to how co-creativity was enacted and experienced by participants. Instruments and movement were used by the group members as largely non-verbal means of creating, connecting, and performing. This emphasized the social and facilitative ethos of with all. And again, some of the things that people said, those people who have got bad experiences, whatever they are, when they hear music that they like, they feel like water that has been dropped on them like a plant. When you let them drink, you feed them, they start to bloom. That's how I describe it. And as someone described their partner, she's more outgoing, she's dancing and participating much more than otherwise. Yes. And finally, I think everything you pick up more each week and you realize, I mean, I got up and did dancing today, which I've never done, and talking to people, and I liked the music. I think it's something that's increased as the weeks have gone on.
So in addition to the research methods already discussed, we also used the Canterbury Wellbeing Scale. And this involved asking participants to rate how they felt before and after the sessions in relation to a set of 5 subscales. And these were happy, sad, well, unwell, interested, bored, confident, not confident, and optimistic, not optimistic. So the statistical analysis of the Canterbury Wellbeing Scale was done by Sarah Strohmeyer, who is a PhD student and research assistant at the Canterbury Christchurch University. And her analysis showed an increase in wellbeing scores, denoting enhanced wellbeing for participants after the withal sessions compared to before the sessions. And in particular for the confidence subscale, a significant increase in scores could be observed, especially after the first session.
Thanks, Millie, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit just about some of the discussion and conclusions around those results of the research. So So the research findings do indeed support the role of co-creativity as an inclusive and equalising approach. Co-creativity for this group was distinguished by a number of characteristic features, including empathic connections, a sense of equality, and the generation of a safe space that enabled creative involvement and sharing. In addition, our findings demonstrate that co-creativity affected experiences of well-being and agency for people with dementia and their partners. The qualitative data, so the interviews and the video, together with the Canterbury Wellbeing Scale data, show that the with all sessions benefited the well-being of people with dementia. However, the Canterbury Wellbeing Scale, or CWS, as it's known for short, also demonstrated the complexities and the challenges of attempting to define well-being for those living with dementia. The nature of the CWS necessitates attributing a numerical value to quite complex concepts, something which could be regarded as being a bit reductive. One of the participants, so someone who lives with dementia, queried the CWS every week, and in response to the question of how do you feel, he said, well, I mean, I'm not well. I have to come to grips with that every day, but I'm not feeling bad. So our findings indicate that well-being is not simply about feelings of increased happiness or interest or confidence. Neither is well-being something that necessarily equates with being in good physical or mental health. On the contrary, it is plausible that someone might be living with a chronic degenerative condition and yet consider themselves in a profound sense quite well. To some extent, for people with dementia, well-being includes ill-being. Whilst the CWS plays a useful role in providing a snapshot of in-the-moment well-being, there is no measure of well-being that also captures the ill-being that is a necessary part of life with dementia. The co-creative sessions helped enhance well-being by allowing participants to acknowledge their ill-being, to be vulnerable, and to share this with others. There were instances of participants who are living with dementia addressing emotions including sadness and anger at their situation. In order to express difficult, confronting emotions, we need to have agency, to be enabled to find our voice in our own personal language, to communicate how our experience feels. The co-creative process can facilitate this, sometimes through play. Difficult feelings were often expressed using humour, and also by providing moments of catharsis and of release. The art forms used provided both a means for individuals to express and communicate emotions and feelings that were difficult to talk about, and also for the group to share in these feelings and to offer support and empathy. As has been said, the co-creative sessions involved periods of silence or pause or lulls, as we came to refer to them. And the artists involved reflected that they had to work hard, me too, we had to work hard not to feel responsible for filling up these pauses, these silences. Whilst these may have involved discomfort, they also opened the opportunity and space for agency and creative expression for the group.
So agency for people with dementia in the context of the co-creative sessions was partly demonstrated in moments when people with dementia assumed leadership of the session. And this provides an interesting counterpoint to the prevailing views that people with dementia are always dependent and require guidance. At times, agency also involved an apparent passivity, so not actively leading a dance or a tune, but nonetheless remaining part of the group and witnessing or supporting others. Agency in withal was often embodied, that is to say it was physically enacted through gesture, movement, even leaving a room, music and dance. However, agency was also cognitive, and participants considered and were able to reflect on their varying levels of engagement. And this new thinking around agency forms part of my PhD project, in which I will challenge our current definitions and explore the idea of agency in dementia more closely.
So to conclude then, the With All project shows that working co-creatively with the arts has the potential to promote inclusivity and equality with people living with dementia. All participants felt that they enjoyed the sense of community and equality that the project generated. We believe that this project also showed the potential that a co-creative approach has for expanding our understanding of both well-being and agency, and not only for people with dementia, but equally for all of us. Thank you very much for listening. And I think the next slide shows some of our publications. And we'd be very, very happy to take your questions and comments and queries.
Thank you very much indeed. Just to acknowledge also Professor Victoria Tischler, who worked with us on this paper, and also Sarah Strohmeyer, who Millie mentioned, just to acknowledge them as well. Thank you very much indeed.